Today we're going to be learning how to change a shape into a form. To create a form, you shade it with a full range of values to make it look three-dimensional. It's really important as beginning artists that you begin learning how to shade forms because forms are found in every object. For example, this is actually a picture of the puppy that we're going to get in 2 weeks. He's a petite mini golden doodle, and we're going to name him Gimli after the dwarf in Lord of the Rings because we're huge nerds here at the Thompson household. And so if I was beginning to draw Gimli, first I would draw him as simple shapes. So for instance, his head would be a circle. His ears would be triangles. His cute little legs are like tall rectangles or cylinders. His feet are flattened ovals, and then his body would be a larger circle here. To make him look three-dimensional, I would have to start shading him utilizing a full range of values to make him look like a form or to make him look three-dimensional. So to do that and to help him look three-dimensional, I have to have certain sections of values on the form itself. So you're going to need to show me these different sections of values in your own forms that you're going to be shading. The first section that I need to see is your highlight. Your highlight is the lightest value area that's closest to your light source. The second area that I need to see is your core shadow. This is the area that is furthest away from the light source, and it's also the darkest value section. The biggest mistake beginning artists make is they don't make the core shadow dark enough. So they tend to make their forms look flat because they're not using a full range of values. So notice here how dark this core shadow is in this section. That really dark black area is going to make that sphere look more three-dimensional. The third section that I need to see is reflected light. Reflected light is light that's being bounced back off the table onto the object itself. Reflected light is not as light as the highlight. It's what we call a half tone. So it's in the middle of the value scale, a little bit to the left. But it creates a highlighted section that helps separate the form from the cast shadow. And the cast shadow is going to be the fourth section of value that I need to see in your work. The cast shadow shape should reflect the shape of the object. It's just going to look a little distorted. Inside the cast shadow, your values need to change from dark to light. It's usually darkest near the object itself, and that dark value section helps define the difference between the cast shadow and the form. And then usually the values kind of diffuse as they're getting further away from the sphere or from the form. One thing I want you to pay attention to is how the edge of the cast shadow diffuses really smoothly into the background. This is a great example of gradation, and that's going to be another requirement I'm going to need to see in the work. Gradation, remember, is a smooth transition of values from light to dark or dark to light. Notice from every section into another, the values kind of diffuse into one another. There's no harsh transition. Artists achieve this by utilizing line weight when they're shading. They're gradually lifting up the pressure of their pencil as they're shading into a lighter section. Or they're gradually pressing harder as they're shading into a darker section. If you struggle doing this, then I recommend pausing and practicing that line weight exercise technique that we previously did, where you're pressing hard when you draw up and light when you draw down. When you begin drawing your cylinder, start by drawing a flattened oval. Move your whole arm when you're drawing. Don't just draw from your wrist. By moving your whole arm, you'll get a more even oval. Then, draw 2 straight lines down from the sides. For the bottom of your cylinder, you're going to be drawing a larger oval than the one on top. This is because we have to follow the rule of ellipses. Ellipses are circles that are drawn in perspective. When an ellipse is further away from your eye level, it's taller in height. So you can see that the bottom ellipse is taller in height than the top one. When drawing your ellipse, avoid having your ellipse look like a football where you have points on the end. You also want to avoid having your ellipse look like it's a flat line. People think, well, it's sitting on a flat table, so surely the bottom of a cylinder is flat. But it's really just another ellipse drawn in perspective. After you've properly drawn your cylinder, you need to go in and erase the contours of the drawing. I'm using a kneaded eraser. Kneaded erasers are great because they absorb the graphite. However, if you don't have a kneaded eraser, just use a regular eraser that you have on your pencil. And we erase because we don't want to have an outline define the form. We want our values to define the form. When you begin shading, hold the pencil further back. This helps create lighter value marks. When you shade the cylinder, you're going to be using the shading technique hatching. So you're making parallel lines next to one another. Shading should be done in layers. The first layer should be the lightest value layer that you're able to put in. Notice how I'm starting my marks at the top of the cylinder and drawing all the way down. You want your lines to start at one end and then end on the other end. The second layer of values should only be 1 to 2 values darker than the previous layer. So here you can see I started shading at maybe a 2 and now I'm at more of a 4. When I shade closer to my highlight, I'm lifting up the pressure of my pencil. I don't need to shade into that highlighted area anymore because I've already laid down that highlighted value previously. You may have thought that that first layer was really dark. However, by the time we finish this cylinder and we start putting in all of those dark values, it's going to end up looking really light. Now you will have to capture a highlight, a core shadow, and reflected light in your cylinder. In addition to that, you have to show a gradation of values. I cannot emphasize enough, it is so important that you build your values up slowly in these layers. For every layer you put in, think about it as an onion. You're gradually making it a little bit darker than what you previously did. Also be okay with your hatching marks to extend outside of the edge of your object. You'll start to notice how my edges are looking a little jagged. I'm totally fine with that because I'm going to go back in and erase those edges. So I'll use my kneaded eraser to curve that out and do the same on the top. You can do a little bit of a highlight with your eraser. Just make sure that if you use your pencil, you blow the tidbits away. Now for the top of the cylinder, you want to use straight hatching lines still. Don't curve your mark. If you curve your mark, it's going to make it look round. The top of that cylinder is flat, so we're keeping our marks flat. Also notice how the values are slightly darker on the right-hand side of the cylinder, and we're seeing that in this reference photo. So I'm pressing a little bit harder on the right, and I'm lifting up and pressing lighter as I shade to the left. So after you've put in all of your values, begin cleaning up around the cylinder. So use that eraser to make everything nice and crisp and clean. Remember, please do not outline the cylinder. Your value should be defining the edge. So it's okay to add a couple extra little lines in there to make things look nice and solid. After you've done that, you can begin your cast shadow. Remember, this cast shadow is a reflection of the shape itself. You still need to be using hatching. So the cast shadow is darkest near the object and gets lighter as it goes further out. Be really careful where you're starting your marks so you do not shade into your cylinder. As you shade out to the left, I do want you guys to lift up the pressure of your pencil just so you can still work on your line weight. I know in the reference photo it's still dark, but let's work on that gradation of values for the cast shadow. All right, so let's talk about some things that you should not do. When you shade, you need to move your whole arm, not just your hand and your wrist. Here I was just moving my hand and wrist, so I was getting curved marks. You also want to make sure that you do not draw little lines throughout the center of the cylinder. When you do that, it can look like fur, and you can also get these little darker marks because technically when we begin a mark, we tend to press a little bit harder than we should. So you can start seeing those darker tidbits in there and it does not look clean. Also, do not scribble by making one continuous line up and down. You need to lift up your pencil after every time you make a mark for it to be hatching. On the top of your cylinder, make sure that you are not curving your marks. You can see how if you curve your marks, it's going to look or rounded. Also, we're not cross hatching, so all of your marks should be parallel to one another. Do not outline the object
When you outline the object, it tends to look like a graphic or cartoon image, and it automatically flattens your form. I'm going in here with some better shading techniques so you guys can start to see how bad an outline can make an object look. For your last form that you're going to be shading today, you're going to be drawing a cone. A cone has an ellipse on the bottom, so make sure you make that nice and round. And you're going to be shading your cone with Scumbling. We're repeating the same exact steps we did for the cylinder. So that first layer, you're pressing as light as you can. You're putting in like that number 2 type value on the value scale. I did forget to erase my outline, so I'm going in and erasing what I have. Now, if you use that pencil, try to blow off as much as you can and then use your fingers to wipe off the extra tidbits. Avoid smearing your fingers over top of your shading marks because that'll make it look nice and sloppy. As you begin adding in the extra layers, pay attention to the reference photo and where the different value sections lie. Make sure you're not shading into the highlighted area. Make sure that you are putting in the half tones, those middle tones, in the proper section. Notice that there's a very distinct highlighted line, so I'm doing my best to put that in, but I'm also making sure I still have gradation from my middle tones to my highlight. I'm gradually shading in these darker values as well. I'm kind of mapping in that line that I'm seeing in the reference photo, and now I'm going to gradually build in my darker values. Don't forget that the reflected light is on the left-hand side of this cylinder. So I'm making sure that I'm not shading certain areas of that cone too dark. In the reference photo, you'll notice that there is a shift in this middle gray to darker gray value in that core shadow section. So I'm just paying attention to that. When you draw your cast shadow, make sure you're shading it in with Scumbling. Keep it nice and dark next to the object, and then as you shade out, try to lift up the pressure of your pencil to create a lighter value. Couple things you don't want to do. Do not draw Scumbling as spirals, and do not take your finger and smear it across the work to try to get a smoother transition of values. So this is how you're going to be graded. 1, you need to shade the cylinder with hatching. 2, shade the cone with Scumbling. 3, in each of your shaded forms, I should see the highlight, core shadow, reflected light, and cast shadow. 4, your value sections should match the placement of the value sections in your reference photo. 5, there should be a full range of values, so I should see the darkest darks with the lightest lights. And 6, there should be a gradation of values, meaning there should be smooth transitions from dark to light grays. This is going to take time. So do not rush this just to get it done. Develop these skills now by practicing, maybe starting over a couple of times, and turn in your best work.